Of course, he stepped down before he could be expelled from the Michigan legislature. Now, former state rep Todd Courser ready to talk about it.
You'll remember Representatives Todd Courser and Cindy Gamrat were accused of misusing state resources to cover up their affair. After days of hearings, lawmakers decided to expel Gamrat from the State House. But before they could expel Todd Courser, he resigned.
Now, joining us now on the phone is former state representative Todd Courser. And Mr. Courser, before we do anything, let's go back to the beginning here. And I just have to ask you the question, what were you thinking when all of this cover-up stuff started happening?
Well, I'll tell you, obviously, thank you for giving me the time today and kind of, allowing your listeners and viewers to be able to walk through these steps. At that time, obviously, there was a lot of pressure, undue pressure from the texting extortion situation. You can't really say that you were thinking rightly in those moments, and you made some critical failures. I think are pretty obvious at this point to everyone. And so, obviously, I took responsibility for those, and including the fateful email that was sent out. But really, there was a lot of pressure undue, and you didn't know what was going to be revealed, and you were also attempting to try and find who the person was that was behind the anonymous texting that.
Now, you're kind of
email and all that.
Now, what I find interesting, Mr. Courser, you kind of deflect back to this person who is blackmailing you, but really the problem isn't that. The problem is that you were having an affair, A, and B, trying to cover it up.
Well, I think I've taken responsibility for that. If you don't want me to answer the question, then that's fine too. I would just tell you this, that if you want me to explain, that's the problem with when you do interviews, is that if you're going to do an interview and you're going to ask the question, if you want me to answer, I'm more than happy to. First and foremost, I've taken responsibility for the relationship, and two, I've taken responsibility for the cover-up. So you're asking me what I was thinking at that point and trying to give you an understanding of how you got to that point and the understanding of what was going on at that time.
Mr. Courser, let's talk about what happened leading up to Friday. You had said that you would not resign. You weren't ready to at any point. What changed? It would seem to some that it got to the point in the middle of the night where you knew they had the votes to expel you, so you said, no, I'm going to resign. Is that how you would paint that picture of what was going on?
Well, I guess in simple terms, yes. I don't want to sound like I'm deflecting if that's really the way that we want to look at it. But I would simply say, in simple terms, yes. I had fully committed to walking through and being expelled. As we walked up to that time, you could see sort of the giddiness of the members, really laughing and joking with one another, as they were really going to exercise their greatest constitutional power to expel two members of the State House, having never read the 833 pages. It was just released the day before, and so there was scant evidence of any misuse of taxpayer resources, and if there was misuse of taxpayer resources, it was very small, and normally the normal steps would not be to expel or even to censure, but to send it to the Secretary of State for an administrative fine, which happens as a matter of routine. In this situation, they had 833 pages of a lot of allegations, but scant evidence to actually support anything in the scope of what they were attempting to do. So as I was walking through that, I kind of felt like that it was back and forth between being expelled and resigning, and finally it fell as we got closer. There was a third attempt, obviously coming up, and they barred the doors and held the representatives there and brought in the state police and didn't let the representatives even go to the bathroom. So everybody was held there until they voted, and just kind of felt like that it was time. It was time for me to kind of be done with that room, and God kind of just released me from the idea of being expelled, and I just walked forward and then signed the papers, and then without saying anything, I just simply walked out of the room.
Do you admit then some misuse of state resources, and are you worried about being charged with a crime because of that?
Well, I think inside of that, I'm not worried about that. I think the state police and the Attorney General's office will do an adequate job in the discovery process. There are a couple of conversations that are of a personal nature and then also of a political nature. And what they're talking about is that these conversations were taped, and ultimately that those conversations happening on state property, which would be any conversation you talk about your family or your family vacations or any of these types of things, would be the same. They're not legal to have personal conversations on state property, and then also as far as the political nature, You're not supposed to have these conversations. So, but normally these, like I said, these are administrative. They're administrative. They're certainly in misuse, but the infraction is very small, and of course they, So I welcome obviously the investigation. It's happening. It's been happening for my understanding is quite a while, and the authorities will take that where it's going to go.
There's a lot of speculation that you might choose to run again, so we have you on the phone here. Would you run for office again? And even if the people of your district did elect you again, do you figure you would be welcomed back by your colleagues who just tried to throw you out?
Well, I'd say that's a lot. There's a lot of speculation in the question. Mm-hmm. I think myself as a believer in Christ, and obviously, I have as much failure and I have no ability to throw stones. But I also know that the power of redemption and renewal and second chances, and so at some point, we'll have to walk that out. But there's a lot of supporters here. A lot of people feel that the process itself was twisted and bastardized to get the result that they wanted. A committee that didn't call any witnesses, even though the witnesses were willing, and didn't go through the evidence in the 833 pages, even though it was before them, to try and prove actually the misuse or the amount of misuse that was there. They conducted this really in virtually a few hours as far as the committee, when the other three happened over weeks and months before the expulsions happened. I think that I think there's a lot of pieces and parts in here that really are offensive to people when it comes to the idea of the way that the process is carried out. So I still have a lot of supporters. I had some in here today that I visited with. So we'll just have to wait and see where that all goes.
Former Representative Todd Courser, thank you for your time this afternoon.
Yeah, no problem. God bless you. Have a great day.
All right, you too.